Hey, this is Dennis, and welcome to another episode of the Grounded Reason podcast, where Joel and I discuss topics like cord cutting, money-saving technology, and just being an all-around citizen of the internet. Today, we're going to talk about the new FCC Chairman Ajit Pai and his potential effect on the freedoms we all enjoy online. We'll also discuss how Senator Thune of South Dakota is looking for a compromise on the issue of net neutrality. But before we get started, I just wanted to thank all of you out there who are supporting the show, every week by listening. We really appreciate all the listeners, and we especially want to thank those out there that have subscribed. If you haven't, we love you too, just not as much. If you want to subscribe, it's free and it's pretty easy. I know in iTunes on my iPhone, you can do it right there from your podcast app. You can pretty much do it that way in most podcast apps out there on the market today. So subscribe. It's a great way to keep up with the show. All right, so let's get into today's episode. Hit the button. So, again, net neutrality is back in the news.
Yeah, I almost want it not to be, right? Like, even though I find it an interesting topic and it gives us tons to talk about.
It does, but I owe the people an Air TV review, and I haven't been able to get to it because of all that's going on. I've been using it for like 2 weeks now. And we're having a lot of fun with it. I got some good opinions on it, and I'm going to write something on it soon. I know I said that last week, but, just bear with me, people.
Stuff just keeps coming.
It keeps coming up. And, I do work another job, like a job-type job for 40 hours, so it's like I try to get it in when I can. Yeah. So, but maybe I'll have Joel write it.
I don't own it. How am I going to write it?
I'll just tell you.
Just dictate. I'll type.
All right, so last week we said that, not last Thursday, but the Thursday before is when we recorded, and we said Ajit Pai was going to probably be picked to be chairman of the FCC.
Yep.
Well, that happened this week.
Turns out.
Yeah, so
unfortunately
called that one.
Yeah.
But I say that, and here's the thing. I've listened to Ajit, like, we're buddies.
Yeah.
I listen to, Pai talk. I don't like calling him Pai. It's like, I feel like.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a formal enough
It doesn't.
Name, but especially given, like, the, cachet of his new office. But yeah, it's Pai.
Chairman Pai.
Chairman Pai.
Okay.
Go with that.
So Chairman Pai, he's like he's a charismatic guy. Yeah. Like, I've heard the guy talk, and he really, he kind of draws you in. He says the right things. He's a bit of a nerd, but he does it well. Like, he's like he'll break out the Star Wars quote here and there while he's giving a policy speech in front of a bunch of people.
His BA is from Harvard, and his PhD is from Chicago.
So, and I can tell when I see the guy, like, I probably would genuinely like the guy.
Yeah, I'm sure he's super bright and interesting and fun.
But he's definitely, and nothing against, lawyers. I know, your wife is one.
Yeah.
But they tend to, some tend to, they know how to work people. Yeah. They know how to, like, because they know how to make an argument.
That's their job. That's why I don't win very many arguments.
So what his tactic tends to be more along the lines of, I notice this a lot, and I'll get into some specifics on this later, but he will agree with something, but then find a technicality to vote against it. So he'll say things like, "Oh yes, I totally support the rules of open internet, but we can't vote for it in this instance because of XYZ." And he does it all the time, and I'll get into that. Now that he's like the chairman of the FCC.
Yeah, these things matter more.
Yeah, so I want to kind of do a little bit of a background on him, and give you an idea of like where he's, because Well, because he says a lot, and he says a lot of stuff that sounds really good, and he's very well thought out, and you can tell that he cares a lot about this stuff, but he has a certain ideology about him.
Oh yeah,
that it always, everything kind of, all of his decisions usually kind of fit his ideology, and that's usually like regulation equals bad no matter what instance or what case it is. And as we've talked about many times on the show, when you're in a monopolistic industry, regulation's really the only way you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I like to point out with regulation, because people oversimplify regulation. They tend to think regulation bad for business. Well, a lot of times it's true, right? Like, regulation can get in the way of all sorts of stuff and sometimes very purposefully, right? Like, we had things like the Glass-Steagall Act that was there to keep, traditional brick and mortar banks and investment banks from bleeding together, and that was purposefully stifling that.
Yeah, because
right?
this thing happened. I don't know. You might have heard of it, the Great Depression.
Right?
So they were like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe banks shouldn't be able to run amok and just invest all their money wherever they want, like they do now because they got rid of Glass-Steagall." But I digress. That's another episode.
But of a different podcast.
Seriously.
but so that's an example of where it very consciously stifles something. But when you're talking things like antitrust regulation, which I consider net neutrality of that vein, what it's actually doing is promoting competition, right? Like, it's promoting business activity because it's breaking up monopolist power.
Right. I mean, yes, it hurts companies, the ones that have the monopoly.
They have,
Everybody else kind of digs it. I mean, all the other companies kind of dig it.
And more consumers love it.
Because there's competition, which means prices go down and innovation happens.
And another thing that's very common in these discussions is people talk about competition as if, the national landscape actually really matters for internet providers. And what I mean by that is that they say, hey, there's Comcast, there's Verizon, there's Cox, there's blah, 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 blah. There's lots of competition. Well, no, because the way internet services are actually provided is locally.
Yep.
And your locality is normally, one, maybe two providers.
If you're lucky, you have one that can give you 25 MIPS, because that's only like 60% of the country. They can only have one provider that gives them 25 MIPS. The rest is it's less than 25.
And
MIPS.
I think we're, and I wish I knew this better, but I think we're in the mid 60s in terms of percentage urbanized in this country.
Yeah.
So that means like that percentage is going to have more options, but that's 35% of 330 million that are going to have fewer options because they're in more rural communities. They're going to have, one provider most of the times. I mean, not always, right? Like, obviously, you're always going to end up with exceptions, but as a general rule, it's much better to think of these things as locality-based rather than national scale.
Yeah, you need to be near a major metropolitan area to have two providers that'll give you 25 MIPS or more.
In general, yeah.
I mean, I would say, I would flat out say that that's probably true almost everywhere you go. You might have an exception here or there.
Yeah, I had a friend at work who was telling me, she lives out in a more rural community, and she was telling me about still having DSL and calling people to try and get like Fios is coming out that way, and it's going to be wonderful for those people, but they're going to have no real choice in terms of price competition,
right? And that's really why. I mean, and we've talked enough about net neutrality where we don't need to go over the rules again.
Gets it.
I mean, if you don't know what we're talking about, listen to the last episode or the one before that, and you'll get
there's a lot of ranting and raving,
but you'll get a sense of what we're talking about. But I mean, really, generally, it just says all content is treated equally over the internet. So don't throttle, don't block, don't prioritize based on content. and when we say that, I mean the internet service provider, like your Comcast, your Verizon, your AT&Ts, your Charters. They need to treat all content equally. And the reason for that, obviously, is you don't want them picking the winners. You don't want them having a say over whose content gets shown to you or what service is going to win out over another. Because they'll have that power if there wasn't net neutrality. They could do that if they like. So Chairman Pai. So Chairman Pai was picked, last Monday, because this airs on Monday. And he will need to be confirmed by the Senate, but they got until the end of the end of this year to do it.
Yeah,
because he was already approved to be on the commission.
Yep.
So it's really kind of a formality at this point. And to be honest, I don't see he's very qualified for this job. I don't see any reason. I mean, the only reason to shoot him down would be a political reason because you don't agree with his ideology, and that's really not a sound reason to hold up his.
It's not going to happen,
right?
Like I disagree with his positions.
Me too.
But I think he's more than qualified for the role.
Like, unlike half of Congress, I think that if you're qualified for the role,
you probably should
get it. He's notably been. Even though he says, like I said, he says one thing and kind of does another, his actions are very anti-consumer, but he speaks with a very kind of populist consumer focus. But to give you some examples on how he's voted while he's been on the commission, he opposed cheaper alternatives to renting set-top boxes.
Yep.
Remember, like recently they were going in where it came out where, I know I pay about when I was using cable, I'd pay about $10 a box rental fee per month. So, the average person, you're talking 2 to 3 boxes probably.
Yeah. We had a whole episode on this.
Yeah. So we talked about this. And so you're talking about $20 to $30 extra a month on your cable bill. The FCC said that's kind of ridiculous, and they wanted to put rules in place to kind of eliminate the need for the set-top box, or to open it up to where you could buy a device and use it, and then those cable companies or those pay TV companies would have to provide you with like an app. Well, he voted against that. He voted against rules to protect your privacy. ISPs were listening kind of, all the traffic, they were essentially kind of listening in on what you're doing, because any data that goes over the line, they could have used to sell to marketers or to
From
whatever else.
From a legal perspective, they could make the argument that they owned that content.
Exactly.
That a consumer's data was their content proprietarily once the agreement was signed and they were using the service.
Right, because it was in the fine print.
Yeah.
Now, the
That's how
FCC wanted to they made a regulation saying that you had to opt in.
Yep.
And it had to be...
And you could opt out at any time.
Right. It had to be an active opt-in. Like, you needed to be presented with this, explained what it is.
Sign it or click a button or something.
Yes, but it's not... It couldn't be in the path of... getting service. It had to be this additional thing to where that you're signing over your information to your provider, and they had to provide an opt-out in case you didn't know what you were signing at the time, and then later on found out what it was. You were able to opt out at any time. He voted against that. Yeah. So,
and that one kind of blows my mind.
I don't see how you could, if you're saying that you are pro-consumer. And I'm gonna get into the kind of like the nuance, because an example of some of the trickiness he does is his argument here, if I recall, was Facebook and the FTC's rules on Facebook and Uber and all that other stuff weren't as strict as this rule. So he wasn't going to vote for it, which, okay, fine. Because he said he agrees with it, but it's not fair for Facebook to get away with it and not an ISP. And I'm kind of looking at that. I was like, that really has nothing to do with what we're deciding right now.
No, and
it's kind of that's like a straw man. It's like kind of like this.
Well, it's an easy cop out.
It's a total cop out.
And like, so Dennis and I, before we turned on the mics, we were kind of chit chatting about like one thing that seems to be a common theme with a lot of the people that are anti-net neutrality is that they think of the internet as a single thing.
Right.
And your analogy, I liked. I still think it's an oversimplification, but I think it's a lot closer. It's an analogy, right? Like it's gonna be an oversimplification,
right?
But it's basically like the difference between a single thing and roads and the stores on the road,
right?
And
like the internet
FCC regulates the stores, the FCC regulates the roads,
exactly. And that's kind of, you have
your FDA thing you said, like.
Well, I said because there's always and we talked about like, Jeffrey Eisenhower's plan to, talk about it last week on like kind of like this really kind of, I'll say it again, Machiavellian scheme,
diabolical,
right? To move regulating the internet over to the FTC, which is kind of a trick because the court's already ruled that any Title II entity
the FTC has no authority.
And even if they really went far with it too. It's like even if a company even if the issue at hand isn't a Title II service, if the company owns a Title II service, the FTC has no jurisdiction, which is insane. I don't even know where they came up with that.
But that's what they ruled. And
that's what they
ruled. It's the judicial branch, so that means that the executive branch has no authority to do anything about it.
No, Congress would need to make a law specifically stating that this is how it's going to be. So what they're always trying to do, though, is say, let's move it to the FTC. Let's move internet regulation to FTC. And I was like, that's ridiculous. That's like saying that because the FDA regulates McDonald's and McDonald's has a drive-through,
right,
and you need to use roads
to get to it,
to get to that drive-through, then the FDA should have jurisdiction over the highways.
Yeah.
That's essentially what they're saying.
Which is
bonkers. Crazy.
Yeah, just nuts.
It shows a complete lack of, and I don't want to say understanding because these are smart men. Yeah. It's like they've convinced them. It's like their ideology over the ideology of less regulation has made them draw these unsound conclusions. Yeah, it's kind of what's happened here.
So, and a lot of great thinkers have come out of University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And it is one of the finest institutions, particularly for economics, right? Like it's one of the finest institutions in the country, but it is extremely anti-regulation in general, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's very pro-market, and that, well, it's almost a false conceit to say one can only be one or the other, right? Like to say you have to be anti-market if you're pro-regulation.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. Like it's a tool. You use the tool when you need the tool, right?
Yeah, I mean markets.
So
we had a time where there was no regulation on the market, and
worked for a long time until it didn't. And Comcast started throttling.
Well, not even that. I'm talking about, back, you're talking like last century, like 2 centuries ago.
The jungle, meaning
seriously,
Upton Sinclair.
Exactly.
The Jungle.
Right. Like there wasn't like.
I don't want that.
No.
I've read that book, and if you haven't, it's about the meatpacking industry in like turn of the century, the United States, turn of the last century.
Right.
So like 1900 something. And it's unpleasant, finding like wedding rings in the meat grinder because of a person, slipped and fell in the giant meat grinder.
Yes.
In the back
Don't eat any steak medium rare back then.
Well, not a steak. A steak you'd probably be okay. Well, ish.
Because
it's at least a solid piece of meat.
A burger, you want that burger.
Near a burger.
Yeah, you want that burger well done.
A hot dog. You don't know. You don't. You want tofu, man.
Well, that's true.
I would have been a vegetarian.
Well, most stuff dies at 180 degrees. So you just want to make sure you get it there.
You still, I don't know, not enough.
No. But that's like, I mean, so it's ridiculous to sit there and say that it's like a zero-sum game here. It's this or that.
Or it's this or that. It's not a transistor. You use the tool that's appropriate for the job. And all I'm arguing here, and this is, I guess, my major problem with the new chairman's like philosophical leanings is that regulation for that market for ISPs, right, seems necessary to keep from monopolist power arising.
Exactly.
Right? Like, I just don't see how you avoid it. And we've seen it in the past, right? Like, we've actually seen Comcast do this in the past. And not to pick on Comcast, right? Like, they just are a gigantic player, and they were doing...
And they deserve to be picked on.
Well, yeah, there's that, too. But, yeah, so...
But, so, like, getting back to Chairman Pai's voting record... he also opposed, because we talked about the privacy. He opposed, the Lifeline program.
Yeah, the one for rural communities.
Yeah, it does like phones and internet service.
Yep.
They wanted to, expand it to help more low income families purchase internet. He was against that.
Yep.
He opposed making the broadband standard 25 MIPS.
Yeah. And that's another one that blows my mind. For one reason. So even President Trump has been talking about like these huge infrastructure projects that he wants to take on, and we'll get into it later. But it's Senator Thune.
Thune, yeah.
In a lot of, I think he's trying to build support for it in the Senate. But one of the things they're looking at is like trying to lump broadband rollout into those infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be nice to have a standard defined for all of those things?
Well, it was 10. It was before, and they wanted to up it to 25. But it should. Broadband
10 is savagery. Right, like 10 is savagery, right?
10 is okay. Here's the thing, and I'll get into this a little bit later. But like,
I'm just shaking my head.
We're deprived in this country, because we don't know how bad it is. Because we're so, as Americans, we're so used to being on top or being, because we're the world's large. We kick ass when it comes to making money.
Yeah, we've done pretty well.
We do. And so we're not used to hearing, when we're bad at certain things when it comes to
and we're bad at quite a lot, but we're very good at shoving our fingers in our ears too.
Yeah, so but I mean,
myself included.
I pulled these statistics. I pulled them today because I didn't want them getting gag ordered. And
wow,
not being able to get them tomorrow.
Yeah, well, that's a possibility
because that's been happening. So we're 17th in the world in a percentage of people with broadband,
and that,
in the country.
That still blows my mind. And
we're a large country.
Yeah,
but so is Canada, and they're 11th.
Yeah, and the other thing that's useful to keep in mind in Canada is that it is geographically, I mean, not only is it dispersed just because it is a gigantic country.
Yeah,
but it's also,
us from our landmass perspective.
Considerably. Yeah. They're also very disconnected. Like all of the provinces, it's very hard for them to interact. So coordinating large projects is difficult. So they did that at the local level in all likelihood.
Yep. And then when I say out of like 17th, that's out of like, your first world for the most part. It's the people in the, the OECD? Yeah.
It's a list of like 40.
Right. 34, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So when it gets down to speed on median, because I mean, I'm a statistics nerd, so I'd never use average because it doesn't,
it doesn't throw the outliers.
Exactly. So I like using median because it gives you a real sense of what's going on, because it gives you the middle person of a population. And we're 24th out of 34 for median speed. And we're behind countries like Czech Republic and Chile. But you know what? We're tied with Turkey. So maybe we can get them next year.
These are not good statistics.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's the state of American internet right now.
You realize that we've done 2 episodes in a row, this being the 3rd, where we've been downers.
Well, like, people need to know this stuff because
they
need to know.
Couldn't we just talk about like puppies and?
I wanted to talk about Air TV, but the president had to nominate Chairman Pai this week, and
all right.
So
back to it.
All right, and for price per MIP. Oh,
I remember this. This is brutal.
Yeah, well, it's worse. And I say MIP. Did we talk about this on the show? How MIP is like a Baltimore thing?
Yeah.
Sorry, people. MBPS. I don't like that's a lot. I like just saying MIP.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway. So when you adjust for purchasing power, do you know what I mean by?
Yeah.
Okay, it's basically
purchasing power of parity. Yeah.
Exactly. So it takes
basically
inflation. Go ahead. You're the Finn person.
Yeah, for
finance,
which is scary. But yeah, it tries to solve for the fact that there's different currencies and different levels of inflation in different nations. So
it's
basically they're talking about like if how much could a consumer in one country versus another country buy of a bundle of goods.
Right. So when you take the purchasing power parity into consideration, we're number 1. That's number 1. Yay! No, it's number 1 as in most expensive per MIP. 60 cents per MIP, where countries like UK, Germany, and our friends to the north in Canada pay half that at 30 cents per MIP.
But you're saying we're number 1, though.
We are number 1 in paying the most for internet.
So we're winning.
We're winning there.
We're winning and losing.
Take that, Turkey.
Yeah. Turkey.
So
the one listener we have in Turkey just dropped off. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But, and I quote that, and the funniest part of it is Chairman Pai voted against net neutrality, and when he said that, he called it regulation, being net neutrality. Regulation was a solution that wouldn't work for a problem that doesn't exist.
And
those numbers tell me there's a problem that exists.
Yeah.
And those numbers are from 1415, which before the rules went in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, I
mean, there's a problem.
I'm not arguing
Chairman
with
Pai.
Yeah.
I mean,
go
ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say I'm not sure the data sets that he and his advisors are looking at, but I call into question their judgment when it comes to this, right? Like I just don't understand where they're going, other than proceeding on ideological lines.
And that's the problem, is because I know these are intelligent people.
Yeah. And
I mean, I work in the tech industry, but I'm not as keyed into it as them. This is their daily life, bread and butter.
They're talking this every day.
How can to be honest, like 90% of people I talk to, like anyone I talk to in the tech sector, net neutrality is just like a no-brainer. It's like,
well, the Reddit article.
Well, yeah, I wrote an article and it made it to the front page of Reddit.
Yay.
Yay! Woo! And it was basically a lot of the stuff that we went over last week on why we should not be moving the FCC to the FTC. And 90% upvotes on that. Like 90% of the Reddit community.
So more or less everybody agreed. And that's pretty, like, dude, I probably said this before, but I can't get 9 out of 10 people in a room to agree on what type of pizza we're going to order,
let alone a political issue.
Yeah. and a pretty hot button one. At least the talking heads get really tense when this topic comes up. So I just don't. I'm surprised. Anyone, even people that I've talked to that don't know a thing about this, and they go, "What is that?" And I explain it, at least to the best of my understanding, and they go, "Oh yeah, why wouldn't we do that?" Right? Like, it is always the reaction
exactly.
I get. And granted, I'm slanting it, right? Because I'm explaining it a certain way, I'm sure. But but it has been very consistent, at least in my experience.
Well, and it's also like anytime I see someone who's against it, I look at their funding, and it's almost always a telecom company.
Mr. Eisenach.
Yeah, all you have to do is follow the money on this issue, and you'll see why they're saying what they're saying. Yeah. Now, Pai was, like, he's a bureaucrat, so he's not being lobbied, but he was a lawyer for Verizon before he was in, the FCC.
Yeah, I mean, and that cultural stuff rubs off. And I don't mean that like we dog Comcast and Verizon a lot, and I don't think they're
out to make a buck. I mean,
yeah, they're doing their thing.
That's what they do.
But like anytime anyone's with any organization, right? Part of the culture rubs off.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of it, right? Like you work with all those people. It's very hard to go to work day after day and, think the people that you're working with are bad people, right? Like, so when you walk away, you go, well, their intentions are good. They're not trying to, screw with people. So like, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If they're saying that this will, hurt their investment dollars, and they won't be able to do what they need to do to help consumers, well, then we want to prevent regulation from stopping that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that feeds into the calculus.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, 15 years ago, I stopped working for a very large parcel company.
Yep.
And there's really only two very large parcel companies in our country.
So
and
take a guess.
I always use that parcel company.
Yeah.
Just because, and I couldn't even tell you why, except because I worked for them and that's the one I like.
Yep.
So, it's really no different.
So, yeah.
It rubs off. So we did, zero rating. Guess where he fell on that one.
Yeah. And zero rating is a trickier issue than the others. Like the first four we talked about. Like, to me, those are no-brainers. And zero rating is one of those where, so to review for people, zero rating.
Well, we covered it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but I mean,
well, I mean, it's the inverse of net neutrality, really. It's kind of like it's a tricky way because one of the tenets of net neutrality is no paid prioritization, which means one company can't pay to have their content be preferred over any other company's content.
Right.
This is the inverse, where you say all companies are going to be treated equally except this company, which gets preference.
Yeah, and so it's basically like the easy example. AT&T with DirecTV Now has said that, data won't count against your plan if you're an existing AT&T customer.
Right, you can stream DirecTV Now. If you have an AT&T mobile plan, you can stream DirecTV Now over that without it counting against your data limit for that month.
So that's effectively a discount for those customers.
Right, because if you had Sling TV
anyone else,
or something else, or Netflix or whatever, that's going to count against your data.
Right.
So you can't use it. So what that does, and you can listen to the whole episode to get the whole ins and outs of it, but really it kind of just winds up in a situation where you're pretty much going to get your phone, your internet, and your cable or your TV all through
you're
one
gonna
vendor.
End up back in a bundled
right,
situation.
and it's going to make it real easy because you're going to need a lot of capital to purchase those three things and own them. So you're only going to have maybe one or two companies that are going to be able to provide those services to you.
So the reason why I say that issue is a little trickier is that, on the surface you can say, hey, but that's a really good deal for those AT&T consumers, but it's actually not going to be long term because of what it's going to do to the market.
Right.
It's going to create, oligopolies. Right?
Well, yeah. Well, when something becomes a monopoly, on the way to getting to monopoly, they have to have some really good deals for people to so they can corner that market.
Yep.
So, I mean, and that's what they would do. I mean, back before they had all these rules and regulations, companies would drop if they had a lot of capital.
Yeah, you'd undercut the prices.
They would drop the bottom out of the price all the customers are loving it.
Yep.
Everyone else moves out of town because they can't keep up with this company that has all this capital that can afford the loss. And then when all the competition's gone, the prices are triple what they used to be. Yeah. And then because they're the only game in town. And that's kind of what will happen. And I promise you, while it seems like 0 rating is a great deal, give it some time and the price is going to go up because they're going to knock them all out.
And here's the reason is we've seen this movie before, right? Like in what Dennis just described is exactly what a company approaching monopoly does, like in a locality, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you were talking about, I don't know, a Walmart choking out all of the competition in the area, right? This is no different.
We are slashing employees' benefits. I mean prices.
Right. Sorry. Yikes. Yikes. Oh, welcome to Walmart. So we're, it's exactly the same thing, except there is no locality, right? Like it's now on the internet. So it's really just, are you using the service or are you not, right? Like, are you an AT&T customer or are you not, right? And if you are an AT&T customer for your internet service provider, then, they're going to have their hooks in you real quick.
Yep.
For content. That's what that comes down to.
Right. So, Chairman Pai, you have a long list of things that seem pretty consumer friendly that he voted down. Meanwhile, saying that he loved it.
And if you can't tell, not big fans.
No, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the way he's voted so far.
Yeah, I'm sure FCC. He's lovely at dinner parties.
And quotes on net neutrality is he gave this speech and he said that we should fire up the weed whacker and remove the rules that are holding back investment, innovation, and of course job creation. It's always down to jobs, but I don't see how getting rid of these regulations are going to create any of that.
No, and honestly, I don't think we do anyone any favors rehashing everything we just talked about to argue those points. But, hopefully after, the stuff we just talked through, you feel similarly. Because I just can't see how this chairman is going to do consumers any favors.
No.
I just don't see it as an option.
Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about, because during this whole, on Reddit, since it got to the front page, I got 800 comments on the thing. So I'm replying back and forth. So this article kept coming up where it was written by Larry Downs, and he's a contributor, so he's not a journalist. I think he's an author, actually. And he writes a lot about business strategy. Tends to be a bit anti-regulation. But Larry Downs, after we've, kind of gone through this litany on, how he's voted, Larry Downs has the gall to write an article which basically says, why is the media picking on Ajit Pai saying he's against net neutrality? And the reason, his whole thesis really comes down to the fact that Ajit Pai has never said, verbatim never said,
right.
quote unquote, I want to destroy net neutrality. Because he's never said that. He's voted against it.
Yeah, no one can see my face, but my jaw.
I know.
Is just
it's because it's such a ridiculous article.
That's actually a really stupid way of evaluating, what a human actually thinks. You watch what they do, not what they say.
Exactly. And he kind of gets to the point where, and he totally falls into the bait and switch, because Ajit Pai on numerous times says that he totally supports net neutrality.
Sure.
And then he voted against it. And so Larry Downs is saying, look, he says he supports net neutrality. I was like, yeah, but he voted against it twice. I mean, what are you talking about? And then he gets into how he never he goes and he lists his bona fides. He goes to his career, right? Never once mentions that he worked for Verizon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to go through someone's career and say, like, their experience, why wouldn't you mention being, like, they're one of the top litigators at a company the size of Verizon?
A gigantic company.
Like, why wouldn't you mention that? So it kind of makes me think that, Larry Downs isn't being on the intellectual up and up here.
Well, and the other thing is, like, if you're going through the new commissioner's bona fides, right? Like, no one's disputing his qualifications.
Oh, no, he's totally qualified.
Right? He's absolutely qualified. Like, it's just, is he good for the American consumer? And I think the answer there is no, based on how he's voted historically.
Yeah, and he also, like, Mr. Downs, the author of this article, which I'll put in the show notes because you'll get a good laugh out of it. But in 2004, when Powell was the chairman, he came up with there were like 4 internet freedoms, and they're different than net neutrality. While net neutrality kind of grew out of those 4 internet freedoms, it's a different concept. And Downs just kind of equates the two in the article. Basically, since Pai said he supported those freedoms, he kind of like drew the conclusion that he supported net neutrality.
Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, I've never seen someone contort themselves so much to write an article. Yeah, I mean, I know he's trying to get his point out there, but
look, if he wants to support Ajit, like, I get it.
Oh, right? I do.
That's
the guys,
fine.
I mean, yeah,
just make an actual legitimate argument.
Oh, I know. But just sit there and say,
don't be lazy.
He's obviously against net neutrality. I don't even see why you would question people who are saying he's against net neutrality.
Then, to me, it's then argued that that's the correct position.
Right. I mean,
and that's it, right? Like, and there are people, like, I've heard people make, persuasive arguments I still disagree with.
Right.
But persuasive arguments. They're bright folks, and they've come out with good arguments against it.
Yeah, but I mean, this is like saying,
this is just lazy.
Yeah. It's like saying, like, Emperor Palpatine doesn't like to shoot Jedis with lightning.
Well, I was going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth.
To get a good sense of, this is what Industry Insider kind of says. The Liberty Media CEO, his name's Greg Maffei. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. But they own like Discovery Channel, USA, QVC, Stars and Encore.
Yep.
So, I mean, he gets it. He said, Ajit's been very anti-regulation, pro-free market, particularly about net neutrality. A lot of issues that are likely to be addressed under the new FCC and a Republican president are going to come into play. And he also said that I think all of the things are very bullish for cable. So he's basically saying that this is going to be very good for cable TV.
Yeah, I would think so.
All right. So, and he said, he also said that, don't worry too much because, companies like Netflix will survive. But I mean, of course they will.
Yeah. And we talked about this in the last episode. Like, Netflix, everybody forgets, is an established company. Like, we like to think of them, or everybody likes to talk about them as if they're like the new kid on the block. They've been around for more than 10 years. I mean, they're an established company. They got deep pockets.
Right.
It's the next Netflix that isn't going to be able to make it.
Exactly. And he concluded, he said, like, on the margins, this is going to be better for cable companies.
Yep.
Not consumers.
Nope.
That was me. He didn't say that.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, so that's where we stand, and we're in this situation now where we've kind of talked about, Pai will probably, if he had his way, overturn it if, it doesn't get move to the FTC, like we said it might last week. We talked about that. Was like one of the plans that they're
if I may,
kicking
I
out.
think that kind of leads into our next thing with Senator Thune.
Right. But Senator Thune actually put on the adult pants today.
Yeah,
And
good for him.
He did. And he went out and he...
Republican out of where?
Yeah, he's out of South Dakota. He came out today, and I appreciate his point, because a lot of people out there are probably saying, you know, the Republicans own the FCC, they have the presidency, they have both houses of Congress.
Yep.
Why would he extend an olive branch? And he made a very good point.
Yeah, it was actually refreshing to hear an adult voice in the conversation. And I feel, Dennis, I got to tell you, I feel very conflicted about calling anyone in Congress an adult. It's a personal thing. I'm just not used to it.
I hear you. But he said the way it works right now, you know, you have one administration go in, they can rig the FCC to work the way they want.
Their way, yeah.
You got to, you know, and then it tends, like right now, we are a country that's at each other's throats with this.
Well, up in
with not just net neutrality, I mean just everything.
No, but where I was going is that up until, with one exception, since World War II, I believe there's only been one time where 3 presidential terms have been controlled by one party.
Right.
And it was Reagan, Bush.
Yep.
And so that means at a minimum, the FCC is swinging one way to the other. It's vacillating back and forth between, you know, one polar opposite and the other every 8 years.
Right. And if you want to talk about something that's bad for business, that's bad for business,
man.
Because every time, like we were talking about this before,
yeah,
you made the point that a lot goes into getting business up to speed with implementing new codes, new regulation, or even when you deregulate, it's a cost that goes with re-engineering your processes with that new reality that you're doing business in.
Yeah, so let's say there's a new regulation that goes in, right? Of whatever sort, in whatever industry, right? Like there's compliance costs associated with that. You got to staff up. You got to build processes around that.
Yep.
That's all money and time and effort that could go into something else.
And you're re-engineering processes when you remove regulations.
Exactly.
So
right, and you're laying off staff, and you're and frankly, like laying off staff, there's the obvious cost of like, you know, the fact that people are out of jobs, but there's also all the cost of processing laying off everyone, right? Like sometimes there's packages, there's all sorts of things.
So anytime you have a huge shift in agency direction, you're going to have turmoil within that industry that body sits over. So in all of them, I mean.
And what Thune said, I think the phrase he used was actually kind of good too, which was like something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of like having rules that change with the political winds isn't good for anyone.
No, it's not.
Right? And that's extremely true. So he's put forward this bill, and you've actually read it.
Yeah, I read through it.
I've just read all the analysis.
Well, I read through the one because he submitted this before, and I'll be honest. Here's the thing. My personal preference is that the FCC still has rule-making power. Like, I like how it is right now. Right now, I think it's perfect because...
Me too. I just...
In the technology sector, things change, and things change quickly.
Yeah.
And I like having a regulatory body with the ability and the flexibility to make rules and adjust and tweak things as you go.
And not having to deal with the fact that it takes Congress a long time to pass bills because it's got to go through both houses.
And I work in IT, and I know, like, doing anything, like, I don't believe in whatever you come up with in your academic ivory tower. never plays out when rubber meets the road.
No.
The only thing that really works is putting something together, letting it go, tweaking it here, tweaking it there, fixing this, fixing that.
Basic agile concept.
Exactly.
My favorite expression for it, a buddy of mine used to say, it's like the way you shoot. You ready, fire, then you aim. Right? And your second shot is where you're really going to try and put it on target.
Well, you mean, when you have to adjust
shoot,
when you're sighting.
And then, sight it, you
Yeah.
shoot once, then you adjust your aim, and then you know where you're really going to be shooting.
Yeah, because you have to sight your rifle. I mean, and that's kind of, and then I've developed software. I've been on project teams, and that's the best way to develop, software is you make a feature, you show it to your end user, you get their buy-in, their tweaks, and then you just constantly go back and forth and make it better and better and better.
And all of the IT industry, whether it's software or hardware, is that way, right? Like, it's the nature of not to get too wonky on the IT side, but like waterfall processes, so processes that move in a very standard
big upfront planning,
serial, upfront planning and very serial, understood path is really good for things that people have been doing for a long time.
It's good for
shipbuilding. We've been doing it for
you're building an aircraft
5,000
carrier,
years.
hardcore planning up front. Right,
we know how to build a ship. Like, we're tweaking a theme. But software development, you can really argue when that started, but let's call it, 60 years.
And again, with software development, it's not like you're building something. You're not building a known quantity.
No, that's my point.
Yeah, you're innovating.
This is something that is, and that's software. Hardware is actually similar in a lot of instances, except it has to obey the laws of physics, which makes everything a little bit weirder. But yeah, in both instances, you're really talking about like stuff that you kind of think you know where you want to go, but you don't know until you've started using it, and the people that you intend to use it have really given you some feedback.
Right. So, and that's kind of why I like having the flexibility that the FCC has, because if you put it through a bill or a law in Congress, that's kind of like the big upfront planning where you hope this works out because you codify it, but then you have no tool to tweak it at that point, because this bill will remove any type of power from the FCC to be able to do that.
Well, in its current state.
Current state, yes.
Right, because this is a draft bill. I believe it's gone to committee, from what I could tell.
Right, and I want to see how that plays out. I mean,
but there's still a lot of work. So the reason why
I didn't even anything that's in the net neutrality rules right now is in that bill for the most part. It's basically
with the exception of zero rating. I don't think it covers.
Well, zero rating still. Here's the thing: zero rating's not in there.
But technically, it's not in.
It's technically not at the FCC, but the FCC reserves the right to take zero rating on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So FCC they do have a little bit of zero rating power where that bill doesn't.
But more or less, it puts in. So Senator Thune's current draft bill takes into account all of the throttling, all the price discrimination, all of the things he talks about.
To clarify, it's the bill that he put forth in 2014. I'm making the assumption it's the same bill. So,
well, the way when I read it, when I read his quotes about it, he said that it addressed price discrimination and throttling.
Yep, it did. And the version I read did as well.
The version you read, you said it addressed internet privacy.
It did, yeah.
And I think those were the big ones.
It had
It did also have a provision, I believe, for, as I mentioned earlier, like investment in infrastructure regarding.
Trump's big infrastructure plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking a slice of that for rural broadband and things like that, which are all good and stuff I agree with.
There's a downside because you lose. So the upside of going with something like what Senator Thune is proposing is you get the stability. A lot of market players, both established and not yet established, would really appreciate that.
Oh, they would.
The downside of it is what Dennis was talking about, which is, boy, I hope you're right when you write it, because if you're not,
it's going to be hard to fix.
It's going to be hard to fix. So, like, write it loose, but not too loose. And that's a delicate dance.
It's hard to do. And not to mention is that this has to go through the congressional sausage party.
I mean, like, do we even have to, like,
and like the ISPs have those dudes and a few ladies on speed dial.
And I gotta say, like, as low as my general opinion is of the Senate, like, the House is full of lunatics.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
no doubt.
Very close to raving lunatics.
Yeah. I mean, I've listened, because I went through a little C-SPAN phase, and you know those local, like the local car commercials? Like, you know, every town has that crazy local car commercial guy.
I'll paint any car for $99.95.
Right. I don't know who's crazier. Like, my congressman, or like the guy the local car guy?
Absolutely the congressman. and it's because the car guy's doing shtick, right? The other dude, that's who he is.
Right, that's true.
Right? And, I mean, like, and I could be wrong, but I don't think there's that. I don't think anyone is a good enough actor to behave the way that our House of Representatives has over the last, like, 15 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they can't fake that kind of crazy. It's not possible.
But it is bad. And we all agree on that. I mean, I've looked at the recent polls.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I'm not alone in that opinion.
Yeah, like, I think 17% of the country is like, Congress is doing a great job.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So
I guess I hold a skeptical eye on what Senator Thune is doing. I am supportive of the idea of trying to have adult decision making in the legislative process.
It's been a long time since, and I'm not going to say a Republican, a senator period, has gone up there and said, you know what, let's see if we can just come up with a reasonable solution to this issue we're having. Because compromise has been, for the past 8 years, it's been completely thrown out of the window.
He actually used the C word in his statement.
I know.
That being compromised.
Right.
Dennis, get your mind out of the gutter.
I know.
But he actually said, like, we need a compromise bill to address this. And I was dumbfounded when I read that.
I haven't heard that in about 8 years.
It's been a long time.
So, yeah. And so, you know, props to Senator Thune.
Yeah. And, you know,
because I mean, I know, like, because I've heard some people, like, I mean, people that listen to, like, I'm sorry, people that, you know, read, you know, websites like infowars.kenyanpresident.co.
Yeah.
They'll yell at me and they'll call me like some kind of like commie liberal when they listen to the show. I've had those emails. I just want to say,
I normally call you that too.
You do. But you know, but I want to make a point here that I think Thune is being an adult here and coming out and doing the right thing and trying to actually, you know, get in Congress to try to work together here.
Yeah, and I'm not so arrogant to think that, and I'm very arrogant, but I'm not so arrogant to think that I am definitively right on all of these issues.
No.
Like, I think I believe I'm right, but I could be persuaded if there was, like, a good, reasonable argument. So, like, to hear someone on, you know, I'll just go ahead and say, the opposite political aisle say that, it's really encouraging, right? This is a person of authority really acting like a person of authority.
Right.
So Good on him.
I remember Congress, used to act this way when I was young.
I'm not convinced they ever did. But okay. Back...
They would fight. But I remember Tip O'Neill and Reagan would actually get together.
And Romulus and Remus founded Rome. After they were raised by
good point.
wolves. Right.
Yeah, that was back in the... I'm talking 1900s here, kids.
You're talking a fair ways back, right? These tales you tell, I don't know. But.
So that's and
that's kind of the news.
It is. I wanted to, I think when it comes to cord cutting, net neutrality is the most important political argument or issue that you're going to come across. On top of that, from a human being perspective, net neutrality is probably one of the most important issue outside of, things you need to survive.
Yeah. To
like your healthcare and,
food, water.
Making sure the FTA is making sure that the food's on the up and up.
We've talked about this on previous podcasts that this is basically at least in our opinion, a free and open internet. Even forgetting the term net neutrality from the discussion.
Correct.
But a free and open internet is, to me, and I believe to you, the extension of the First Amendment, right? It is our freedom of speech that is actually at risk when we talk about that.
Totally. And I'm all you ever seen the movie, They Live?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
with Rowdy Piper?
Exactly.
You think I missed
it's
Rowdy
sci-fi
Piper?
classic. When it comes to net neutrality, I'm I come here to do two things. Kick a bunch of ass and chew bubble gum.
I'm all out of bubble.
I'm all out of bubble gum. That's how it is with net neutrality.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm Dennis Rostaro.
And this is Joel Reeves.
And we're all out of bubble gum.
Thanks for listening. If you have questions or comments and want to contact the show, you can email us at podcast@groundedreason.com. Or you could follow us on Twitter. The handle is @groundedreason. We're also on Facebook, and we have a phone number you can call if you want to leave a message. All the ways to get a hold of us are in the show notes. If you want to support the show, please subscribe. Remember, it's free. And if you want to go that extra mile, leave us a 5-star review in iTunes. Again, thanks everybody out there for listening, and we'll see you next time.